Hello, Anime VISOR here.
And SiGNUM.
I had intended to make this video closer to the release date of the Blu-ray that came out recently.
But a couple of copyright strikes put the channel on hiatus for a little while.
Indeed. But with part 6 right around the corner, it's as good as time as any to go over my thoughts on Lupin the Third, Return of Pycal, aka Return of the Magician.
Lupin? When you said part 6 I thought you meant Joe.
Anyway, before we get too far off track, let's go ahead and hit play. Lupin the Third, Return of Pycal is a 50-minute OVA from 2002, directed by Mamoru Hamatsu. I'm not familiar with much of his work, but I have at least heard of Air Gear and Crusher Joe. This time around, Lupin and his gang find themselves in Greece to try and nab the celestial crystals. When Lupin attempts to steal one of the crystals, he finds himself up against not one, but two Inspector Zenigatas. Except one of those Inspector Zenigatas can breathe fire and fly through the air.
I'm going to assume that one's a fake Zenigata.
That or Zenigata had one hell of an off-screen training arc. But as you can guess from the title of the anime, this Zenigata turns out to be the man they call the Magician, Pycal. He plans to gather all the celestial crystals to give himself immense power over others. And it's up to Lupin, Jigen, Goemon, and Fujiko to stop him.
Since this OVA is called Return of Pycal, I guess Lupin has run into him before?
Correct. All the way back in Lupin the Third Part 1, and appeared in the second episode. A quick rundown of that episode: Pycal seemingly had vast scientific knowledge. He was able to craft himself a hardened second skin, fly, and shoot fire from his fingers to kidnap Fujiko, so he could find out where she hid the film of schematics she stole, at one point even setting her on fire. Lupin eventually catches on and then uses Pycal's tricks against him, by setting him on fire and letting him fall down a waterfall, presumably to his death.
Old Lupin the Third sure was dark.
Before Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahata came on to direct, it sure was. Return of Pycal hits a similar tone, maybe not quite as dark. It does have a splash of nudity here and there, mostly as fan service. If you watched something like Lupin the Third the First and thought the older Lupin the Third entries had a similar age rating, I'll let you know that they do not. To be perfectly honest, the age rating can be all over the place with Lupin the Third, something to keep in mind if any of you plan to binge the Lupin the Third series with any of your young kids. Getting back to the OVA, one of the interesting things about this Lupin the Third entry is that it was the first Lupin the Third to use CGI and digital effects throughout. The early CGI shows with certain scenes, like the boulder chase scene, along with a few other instances. Some of the digital effects are unique to say the least. The aquarium with the live action fish was a choice. If it was the right or wrong choice, I don't know, but it certainly was a choice. I've heard the master, the preserved final cut of the OVA, was in a pretty bad shape, so kudos to those at Discotech for getting this to look as good as it does.
And what are your thoughts on the story?
It's okay. The story is simple. Lupin and crew need to stop the bad guy. The major intrigue is that the bad guy is Pycal, and that it being his return. It's a nice little throwback to when he appeared in Part 1. The OVA was paced well enough and never felt too out of the loop with what was happening, unlike with Goodbye Partner, which I talked about in another video, some of the problems I think it had, mostly with Jigen. Coincidentally, here in Return of Pycal, while not as bad, Jigen is kinda used as a plot device here as well. While it's set up decently, it's sort of weird what it did with him.
Well, what did it do?
I think you'll laugh when you hear this, but essentially, Jigen has supersonic hearing in this OVA because of his allergies.
Come again.
Supersonic hearing because of allergies. To be fair, it does show this happening, so contextually within the OVA, it makes sense. Scientifically, I'm not so sure. Anyway, it later helps Jigen hear some robot birds that try to attack them, but also then causes him to turn on Lupin briefly. It technically works as far as plot devices go, but it is a weird one.
Seems like you could say that about this OVA.
Yeah, that's probably the best way to sum up this entry in the Lupin the Third series. A bit of a weird one. Odd digital effects and dated CGI, bringing back a character that was assumed dead, that same character being able to fly and shoot fire, Jigen's supersonic hearing because of his allergies. Even the aspect ratio is a bit funky at times. The opening and ending themes are in a 4:3 ratio, while most of the movie is displayed in 16:9, save for a certain scene with Fujiko which goes from 4:3 to portrait. The OVA also has 3 secret endings, one that wraps up Zenigata's story, one for Fujiko, and one titled The Mysterious Old Man chapter, which kinda has a big twist. That ending also kinda helps piece together why Goemon was fighting in what I assume was a tournament during the OVA, and if I think about it, maybe even Jigen's allergies. Maybe that pollen was a bit more magical now that I've thought about it. I vaguely remember stuff like secret endings being a thing on some DVDs back in the day. There would be these hidden Easter eggs that you could trigger by doing certain things in the menu. I'm not sure how the endings were implemented on the original DVD, but the fact that Return of Pycal had them is another weird quirk regarding this entry in the Lupin the Third series. Like I said, the story is only okay, but all the weird stuff it does, for me, comes across as quaint and charming, more than it does bad. It has all these weird digital effects and strange footage at times, and it may not be as narratively strong as other Lupin the Third entries, but it's unique.
It's memorable in other words.
Yes, for better or worse, you'll remember Lupin the Third: Return of Pycal. It's not a Lupin the Third you need to rush out and watch, but if you're curious about one of the stranger Lupin the Third entries, consider checking it out. With all that said, what are your thoughts on Lupin the Third: Return of Pycal, dear viewer? Let us know in the comments below. As always, I've been Anime VISOR.
And I've been SiGNUM.
Thanks for watching, and see you later.
Bye bye.